All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Shawn Sherman. Welcome, Shawn.
Hey, thank you for having me, buddy.
No, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you coming on here. I had recently, I guess I had Dan Fichter. Obviously, you
Oh
guys
yeah.
are well connected, and Dan always references your work. I think in every single thing that I've listened to or watched, he references you and the Square One system. So I was like, okay, well, the next logical step obviously is to get you on
Yeah,
here.
that's awesome. I'm appreciative of this opportunity, and yeah, he's been very good to me and very effusive in his praise of what I'm doing. So he's a great asset and a great friend. So it's good to be with you.
Perfect. I got introduced to, I guess from the outside looking in, we'll call it voodoo. So I got
Yeah,
introduced to
yeah.
this voodoo through Dan's various podcasts and things he's talked about, and it's something that interested me a lot, and I really enjoy what he talks about as well. So it'd be nice to
Mhm.
kind of break it down even further with
Cool.
you. So do you want to maybe
Hmm.
provide? Obviously, you have the Square One system. Do you want to maybe just
Yep.
start with, okay, what is the Square One system? What are we trying to achieve out of
All right. So every time someone asks me that, I give them a different answer. So I don't have my
it?
elevator pitch. So we'll see how this one goes.
Perfect.
Yeah. So it's really it's a system that you can use to restore organization to the nervous system. And okay, so that's about as cleanly as I could say it. And I would say that like as we go through life, we have different stress and traumas and injuries and emotional states that can kind of compromise our nervous system, and it goes with you the rest of your life. So there's that the book, it's entitled "The Body Keeps the Score." Like I think that just encapsulates that concept very well, just in that title. So we walk through life, we go through life, and we have all this neurological baggage, and then that's going to erode our ability and our efficiency to create upright posture and locomotion. And those are our two basic patterns that lead to all other learned and athletic patterns. So what we're doing is kind of doing like a reset and a restoration process to restore organization to the nervous system as it relates to posture and movement.
Gotcha. So does reflexive performance reset RPR, is that based
Mhm.
on your system or how are they related?
No, they're totally separate. The biggest way they're related is through Dan because he's like good friends
Oh,
with me and he's good friends with a lot of those guys. So
yeah.
that's where the biggest link. So reflexive, RPR is based in Be Activated. The Be Activated, Douglas Heel. He's I think he's an osteopath. I believe. I can't remember if he's an
I'm not too
osteopath.
sure.
Yeah, he's PT doc. I'm pretty sure he's an osteopath. I could be wrong about that, but he's South African, and I believe that maybe what it is it's the neurolymphatic stuff. I believe that that's all based on Chapman's reflexes, and I believe the original guy who came up with this whole neurolymphatic piece, I believe, was an osteopath. So maybe Doug is a physical therapist. So I stand corrected. I'm not sure exactly what Doug does, but he had this Be Activated piece, and then I know the RPR guys that they want to bring that concept to like the sports world here in the States.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a modality, and it's looking at this connection and this relationship between specific muscles and specific anterior and posterior neurolymphatic areas of the body, and how do you get a really cool effect by getting some or some lymphatic drainage. And with Square One's a little bit different in that I don't think of Square One as a modality. I think of it as a framework that's based in some very basic neurological principles. So it's a very principle driven system where it gives you as a clinician or a movement professional a lot of leeway. There's decisions you can make, like I can do this, I can do that, and so you can almost like run little mini experiments on whoever you're working on, and you're just monitoring the global systemic impact that it's having on the nervous system. So if you find an activity that's causing a stress
Hmm.
response, there's ways that we can reset and restore organization to vision, to the vestibular system, or proprioception. So how that's kind of how they're different. How Square One, what's really cool about I think Square One is that it's a nice complement to anything I've run across. So you could sync it up with RPR, you could sync it up with NKT,
Mm.
you could sync it up with active stretching, like the what's the guys up in Canada, FRC, yeah, FRC.
Hmm.
It meshes well with like a chiropractic adjustment or massage. If you're doing martial arts, the fighting arts, like I suppose you guys are into. So you can mix it with anything because it's really a way to gauge how the nervous system is responding, and then really quickly restore organization to getting upright and that base pattern of locomotion.
Nice. You mentioned at the beginning about neurological baggage. I guess would the
Mm.
layman's or a common term for that? Like people talk about some people hold stress in certain places in the body. Would that be like kind of
Yeah,
like a similar thing?
I think so. I guess the whole distress in a certain part of the body, I would say that would be like one of like a myriad of different downstream effects of neurological disorganization.
Okay.
So that'd probably be like a length tension relationship in a muscle. So maybe a muscle's chronically firing
Yeah.
24/7 because trying to create like safety. So I think that would be one downstream negative impact of neurological disorganization or neurological baggage, as I said earlier. Yeah. And it could
Okay.
be like tightness, it could be weakness, it could be pain, it could be changes your technique and how you perform a pattern. Because if your brain perceives certain actions as like kind of unavailable or inaccessible right now, the brain really quickly will rewire around that, and you'll just compensate in how you create movement. So compensation has all those other downstream symptoms, I guess you could say.
Mm,
Yeah.
nice. So this might be
Eh,
a very general question, but where do you start with something like this? If someone's listening to this and they,
mm,
okay, neurological, this and that. Okay, there's a
mm,
vestibular system. I gotta maybe do my vision. I gotta do things that I touch. Like,
yeah.
where do you start with all this?
All right. Probably depends on how much time, effort, money they want to put into something. If you want to invest like almost no time and no know-how and no money, read the book Breathe by Nestor. Nasal breathing,
Mm.
super cool stuff. Like I read that book about 2 years ago. Square One's been around for about 15 years actually. Our impetus
Oh
moment
wow.
was in '08. Yeah. And but I read that book Breathe, and that inspired me to look further into just breath work. And at the time Square One was purely a proprioceptive reset. And I read the book Breathe, and I started tinkering around with breathing, and that's what actually helped me to figure out a reset for the vision and for the vestibular piece. And long story short, all the crazy stuff I've been messing with, there's something truly magical that happens when you add nasal breathing to an athlete's programming, even in the middle of a workout, in the middle of a match, in the middle of a game, part of their training process. I say that's a low hanging fruit piece is really focused on making sure you're doing more nasal breathing than you currently are. So I think that'd be an easy way to kind of just play around with some stuff. We have some online products. Signal Six is like $100. I think it's very underpriced for the value that it's been providing to a lot of these coaches. If you go to our Instagram account and you kind of scroll through some stuff, about once or twice a year, I share some different like standing versions of 6-6. So it's just like this isometric routine from the neck down to the hips.
Hmm.
So if you kind of go over our Instagram stuff and just kind of look through it, you'll find some nice goodies in there. So there are some pretty beefy freebies in there if you dig into it a little bit.
Nice.
And then
You
yeah,
wait, no, you're good.
go ahead.
You've mentioned as well. So you mentioned like, okay, you've got your vestibular system, you've got
Mm-hmm.
your vision, the proprioception. So
Yep.
if you were going to, and you talked about resets, where you're kind of resetting these systems so
Yeah.
you're moving, I guess, well within whatever it is you're doing, training, lifting, whatever. But
Yep.
how do you know which one of those is the
That's
problem or where
awesome.
you should start?
That is awesome. And I was literally talking to Victor this morning at 6 a.m. my time, and we were literally talking about that. And it's really cool. And he was giving me some tips on. He goes, well, maybe if you touch like the occipital region, that correlates to proprioception. You put the finger in the ear, it correlates to vestibular, and just kind of touch the eyes to kind of figure like a priority. But I said, all right, Dan, I'm not saying you're wrong, but here's a story I've been telling, and I'm not saying I'm right and he's wrong. Maybe the answer's in between. Maybe he's right and I'm wrong. I'm not sure. But I always talk about how the nervous system or the person's body is a building, and these different sensory systems, vision, vestibular, and proprioception, those are three different doors into the same building. So what I've found is it
Mm,
doesn't matter if I reset vision or vestibular or proprioception.
okay.
So how I choose it as a Square One guy is when I do the proprioception piece, it's a little bit more, there's a couple more questions I have to get answered when I interview the person's nervous system. And it's not long. So that might take 8 seconds versus if I just go through the vestibular visual, it's like 2 seconds. So it's just a little bit of a time saving. So I like to, if I have a brand new patient, or I'm not a patient, I'm not a licensed medical person. If I have a client or an athlete, a lot of times I start with the proprioceptive piece because it gives me a little more fine details, and I kind of like to get to know their body. And then if it looks pretty classical, and they come in and have back pain, and I find a lot of hip and knee and low back issues, I'll then just start going into the vestibular and the visual resets because they're just quicker, cleaner, and I maybe don't need as much detail after 20 minutes into a session or so.
Okay. So how are you then assessing that initial,
Mm.
I guess that initial pain or whatever it is there, and then
Hmm.
what do those resets look like? Do you have any examples of
Yep.
maybe you could run through
Sure.
for each one? Yeah.
Sure. Yep. So the initial way to assess a person, we're using neuro response muscle testing. Are you familiar with that style of
No.
muscle test? All right. So if you go in here in the States and also in Australia as well, uh, in orthopedic circles, there's what's called break testing, which is a manual test. A lot of times, physical therapists or physios would use that. Orthopedic surgeons, and they're looking for structural damage. So instead of ordering an MRI, they might run you through some orthopedic tests and find out if there's some tissue degradation based on some manual testing. So there's this testing where they'll start light and they'll gradually increase the force to find out what the force output is. So it's more of a strength test.
Hmm.
Neuro response testing is very low intensity, but you get to full intensity very, very quickly, like tenth of a second, quarter of a second. So maybe we're only imposing 3 to 8 pounds, like 1 to 4 kgs of force. And we're really finding out, can the brain send a signal to that limb quick enough to mount a response?
Hmm.
Okay, so we're using this neuro response test. So what I do is I'll find a failed position, and then I'll do something like turn your head to the left and find out if the nervous system likes that position versus head turning to the right. So we're looking at the two phases of gait of right step when the right foot hits the ground versus left step when the left foot hits the ground. So left head turn, it correlates with right step, right head turn correlates with left step. And we could use other body parts. So what I'm trying to quickly find out, is there a discrepancy? Is there a preference right versus left? And once I
Hmm.
see that, that gives me all kinds of information. Like, okay, cool. They're avoiding left and they're landing extra hard on right. And if I want to fill in some of those deficiencies with left step, what I would do with the vestibular system is just simple head positioning. So it's literally be left lean with a nasal breath and a right head rotation with a nasal breath. That would be a vestibular reset for that manufactured, that little artificial scenario we just said about avoiding left step and over favoring right step.
Hmm.
With visual, it'd be really simple. It'd be an eye position. It'd be eyes left and a visual, a nasal breath. And if it's a proprioceptive piece, I would actually have to go further than just head rotation right left. I have to find out what joint is the issue currently. Where's the brain perceiving ground reaction forces as a threat or like unsafe? And then I would do is if we ascertain that it was your left hip, we would then have to shove you into like kind of mimic ground reaction forces into flexion, internal rotation, and adduction. And what's going to happen is that person is going to fail one of those three and they'll be fine with the other two. So once we find out, oh, it's hip adduction, we'll just have them perform an isometric contraction into hip adduction. So the fix is really simple. It's too easy, but the magic of it is that it really matches with that person's real time perceived, like the subconscious perception of threat. So if we give
Mm.
the person, it's not about the intensity, it's about the accuracy of giving that person's nervous system exactly what it needs at that moment.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
So the example like you gave of turning the head and then nasal breathing things, it's almost like because they're correlated with the left step, you're trying to
Mm.
challenge that further. So when they,
I would say almost the opposite. Instead of trying to challenge
okay.
it further, we'd actually say, "Hey, it's okay." It was almost like a soothing response. It's almost
Ah,
okay. Put them in a
okay.
position which is probably perceived as a threat, and that's where the nasal, that I think that
I
parasympathetic
see.
state helps get.
Okay.
Yeah, it's almost like showing the brain, like, "Hey, this is actually okay," because it doesn't look like much. If I don't have pain, most people think, "Oh, that's no big deal." Like, well, it's not about whether you have pain. It's about when you put yourself in a position, and if that causes a failure of these neural response tests, that lets us know really quickly, like, oh yeah, that the brain right now has a problem with that position. So then we just add a layer in that nasal breath, and it's okay. Now we're actually talking to the brain, to the body that way. But it's almost that's what I imagine in my head. I'm kind of like stroking, like petting the dog kind of thing. Like, it's okay, you're a good boy,
Yeah.
So just kind of say it's okay to be in that position. So we're kind of finding that threat response and put them in that, like that, where it is a challenging position, and then say, no, it's cool, man. They're like talking to their subconscious. It's good. It's fine. It's safe.
Gotcha. And so,
Yep.
and the goal of doing this then would be to get these short-term changes and then
Mm.
basically ingrain it within training and then just
Yeah,
repeatedly doing that versus trying to
I
make
think so.
long-term change from something like that.
Well, I think we have a long term change with it too,
Okay.
because, yeah, when you because now we're probably getting a little bit into neuroplasticity, which is like neurons that wire together, fire together, wire together. So absolutely following up square one with any kind of exercise is amazing. So squatting or walking, swinging a golf club, whatever is great. Um, but I think what we're doing is the goal would be to get the nervous system to not have a preference between landing on your right foot or left foot, bottom of a squat or
Mm,
top of a squat. So if we have where the nerve is no preference, then it's almost like, okay, I can do any kind of training style you want to do in this moment. And it's almost like preparing the soil to get more goodies out of whatever training, whether it's a rehab deal or it's a performance deal or it's a fitness program. So it's almost like getting the nervous system ready and prepared to handle whatever you're going to throw at it.
gotcha. So,
Yeah.
how could someone listening to this assess themselves? Is there an easy
Mm,
way to do
mm.
something, even something small?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna have. I've been talking about this for about a year. About 2 years ago, I had this idea, kind of this epiphany, where like square one's weird. If you haven't seen it, it's like it's not just, hey, let's just do a bunch of repetitions and we're gonna do the skill work. And we're not anti those things. Like sometimes people confuse that. So we're not anti motor learning. We're looking at kind of like restoring motor control, and that just you do that differently. And so it looks weird. We have this arm's fail, and they think you're pushing harder, and that's why we'll start off with maybe a couple restrictions in range of motion, bring some order to the chaos, and you see almost instant changes in range of motion to help validate, like, look, I know this is weird, but some cool things are happening. Um, I'm trying to think. I lost my train of thought there a little bit about what was the question was
About someone
long
can
term and
assess
short term.
themselves.
Oh,
So
assess
someone can
yourself. Yeah,
assess
yeah,
themselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so sorry. So then what made it? Yeah, I had 3 hours of sleep last night. I'm sorry. Like I'm like losing a little bit. But yeah. So this whole idea of assessing yourself, this idea I had was I would have people on their back for the last like 13 years. They'd lay on a massage table and I'd run square one on them, and we're imitating ground reaction forces to have this real world experience, even though they're on their back. But what's weird about that is when the chaos sets in, when we challenge the nervous system, even the worst athlete I've ever worked on, nobody's ever fallen off my table. So like, okay, so that's a little bit weird because they're like, they just have to trust that when I'm pushing, I'm not going hard. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to get these people upright more and put them in balanced compromised positions. So what I've been working on is if you put somebody in a balanced compromised position, let's just say it's like a split stance, like a split squat stance,
Hmm.
one foot in front of the other, and they're standing nice tall posture, and there's a little sway, no big deal. But we're looking for this Moro reflex where this hyper correction, like with this writing deal where like your body kind of spazzes a little bit. It doesn't hurt, but it's almost like you're trying to maintain balance. You almost get tripped and fall kind of deal. So you can then do stuff like, oh, let's turn my head and do different things. And you might find a certain head position that kind of throws you off balance. That's a
Mm.
pretty darn solid evidence of neurological disorganization. So if I was in a room with that person and we saw that Moro reflex, there's like a 99.9% chance if I did a neuro response test, they'd probably fail it. It's like so far to date,
Okay.
it's been 100%. I say 99.9 because I'm gonna
Just
see
in
an
case.
outlier. Yeah, tomorrow or next month, I'm gonna see some weird thing. So I was gonna keep the door open. So that would be a really strong indication of, hey, there's a position, there's a posture, there's a shape that my nervous system is a little bit like it doesn't have a plan for that position. So that could be something that they could do on their own. And I'm actually going to put out this informational product, this program, like a digital product. We'll have it has over 5,000 different postures actually. So
Oh, well.
it's like six different base. Yeah, so it's right and left side of the body, six different postures, six different head positions, over 70 visual inputs, and that's the wild card. And you just run yourself through them, and you're just trying to scan and try to find out which shapes you personally have an issue with. Because you get a good athlete, and it looks like, oh, it's an easy position for you or I, and they fail it, and then they do some kind of really even more difficult thing, and they're fine with it, and you and I might fail. So it's very individualized. Even a good athlete,
Mm.
bad athlete, it's really crazy. Some positions that it's easy to make assumptions that are wrong, that someone's a great athlete and that they have no problem with balance. Like that's not true. So it's if you can put people through these different balance compromise positions, if you search far enough and you had just the right amount of, if you go eyes closed and stand on one foot and do dynamic head movements, like good luck. I mean, I'm sure there's some people on the planet who can do it, but it's really tough for 99% of us.
Before getting back to the podcast, I want to let you know there's a link down in the description for the Swedes Arts of Fighting underground community. You can get all the help you need for your combat sports training. You get every single Swedes Arts of Fighting training program, online course, and you get access to a range of coaches within the private Discord community. So go check that out, and back to the podcast.
So if you find that, that's pretty good evidence that you're some neurological disorganization. Yeah.
Okay. So I like the simplicity of that test. Basically, in a split stance, would you have feet like tightrope position? Like, okay, tightrope position, move your head left and right. And if you have
that'd be even tougher. If a little, yeah. God, sorry to cut you off. Yep, you're nailing it. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. So basically, move your head left to right in that position, and if you have that falling reflex, then okay, you might have some kind of neurological disorder. But then, what does someone do to reset that?
Great, a couple different things you could do that are real quick and easy. There's this piece of your ear right here in the front. This piece of cartilage called the I'll try to get it in view here. Called the tragus, and that ties into the vagus nerve. And I got this piece. I like to give credit to all my sources because I don't like these people that are out there in the industry. They borrow stuff and they never tell people they borrowed it. Oh, this guy's so smart. Like, no, he just read a lot of books and he's not sharing where his sources are. But there's a video on YouTube called How Trauma Gets Trapped Inside the Body and What to Do About It. It's such a lengthy title, but it's a cool little video. So that's where I got the tragus piece. I started screwing around with it. Like, wow, this is pretty phenomenal. And what I found is if you just squeeze it one time or poke it like a button, there is no neurological reset effect. But as long as you do a double squeeze where you squeeze and just kind of rub it under your fingertips, it doesn't have to be painful. It just has a neurological reset. So what you can do is go right back to that balance compromise position. Did it get better? If not, you do it again. Now, what I'm finding is about 2 out of 3 out of 4 times, you do it one time, that balance position gets better. So you just move on to another challenge. But every once in a while, you'll get stuck like, oh my gosh, like you do it. It feels like nothing's happening. You might need to clear it out 8, 10, 12 times. You might have to do that reset repetitively because that's just a funky position. It's kind of complicated. So maybe that relates to the 4 ankle sprains and the broken leg and whatever you got punched in the side of the who knows? I mean, there could be a lot of trauma associated with that one position possibly. So yeah.
And
so find that balance
challenge
position. You could. I mean, I have more specific and quicker ways to go about it, but that's why I'm putting this product together, because it's like, okay, here's something that doesn't require a whole lot of skill, and they're still going to get like 90 to 95% of the goodies of square one. Because we have the Signal 6 piece, and it's good. It's really good. I wouldn't put it out if I didn't think it was good, but honestly, compared to square one, it's just not that good. It's just not refined enough. There's no assessment with it. So in good faith, you'd run yourself through these isometrics and people get good results with it. But I like this balance compromise thing because it's like, oh, you can actually self-assess a little bit. You can run on teams of guys. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a really cool product. And it'll have, I anticipate in my mind, it will have like a little workbook on it. So I'm almost imagine like maybe we rank them from like, okay, this is the easiest one. And here's 5,000 to 5,200. These are 200 toughest. And I'm thinking we kind of group them together and say, hey, work through this workbook. And because once you clear these, for most people, they tend to stay cleared unless, there's like some kind of trauma, car accident, you play football, you're in fighting sports and you had some trauma that way. But for most Joe Schmoes that are going to the gym 3 days a week and running 5Ks a couple times a year, once we clear these frames, they tend to stay pretty darn clear for most people.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess from the outside looking in, for someone who may be skeptical of the system, the question in my mind would be, okay, how much of this comes down to just repeating the task and getting better at doing it? For example, if I do that split squat thing and I do whatever, I do the split squat thing again, like I've done it once, so maybe I'm going to get better each time I do it. So I guess like
potentiation, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we get that a lot. It's funny. Last time I had that live with somebody, we were doing, I think it was chin ups. So they did a chin up and it triggered them and we cleared it. And, by the 4th, 5th, 6th time, it wasn't triggering them. He's like, that's potentiation. I'm like, look, man. And it was actually, I was over in Australia. I'm like, I wouldn't have had 36 hours of travel time to come over and show you potentiation. Like, I wouldn't have done that. That's crazy. I just wouldn't, and like potentiation also wears off as soon, whatever, after a certain number of minutes. So we had that piece. But then we said, like, okay, let's do it with your push-ups then. So what we did is had him do a push-up. I checked him and it failed. Like, all right, so let's just wait. Like, we'll try to mimic it. Now do 2 push-ups. And it still failed. Then he did 3 and 5. And if we did like 10, 12 times, like, well, when's the potentiation going to kick in on this pattern? right? Because it's like so
Okay.
it's a common that's what I would think if I was in your shoes. That would be maybe I wouldn't think that, but I would be like that'd be one thing if I'm trying to debunk it a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, so potentiation wears off. We have people that we work on that been to whatever a bunch of different practitioners, whether it's PTs or chiros, they can't solve it. And they see a square one person, and whether it's the first session, second session, third session, usually within the first 1 to 3 sessions, they have this crazy result. And then a week later, the effect is still there, and a month later, and a year later, the pain didn't come back. Like we have uncountable at this point number of success stories like that. So potentiation, like you take a nap, you wake up, like it's done. You gotta do your warm up, your active dynamic warm up, the next workout, and the next work, and the next workout too, to keep that effect going.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
I guess that'd be my first answer to that. To
Perfect.
say that's probably not what's going on here. Yeah.
Nice. And talk me through as well with the proprioception, I guess, reset. So I'm part of Dan Fictor's membership, and he just did a video recently, and he has a spiky ball on his hands doing that before doing bench press stuff. Do we just run through some of that as well? What are you trying to achieve, I guess, doing something like that?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's much more of a tactile piece, which is very closely related to proprioception. And I'm not sure even the delineation between the two. As I see, I tell people all the time, like when I developed this, I didn't come in through the neurological door. I came through more like I'm a pattern person and I'm like a puzzle person. I see how things fit together. And so we're using neurology on the back end to describe what's going on because the effect is so quick. I think the neuro spike ball, that'd be more like of a tactile input.
Okay, gotcha.
So what we're doing within square one, it's more, all right, what specific joint action? So I always talk about, I got away from muscles as I was developing this because you can't isolate one. There's no muscle that you can isolate, its function. So therefore, it makes it really. It's a trash testing variable, like in any kind of experiment. Because if you're talking about the lat, which job? Internal rotator, external rotator. Is the hand on a bar? Is it open chain? Is it what position you start from? There's a lot of problems with that in the field for guys like us that are more like performance people. And so what I'm looking at is joint actions because they're a lot more isolatable. That's that one joint flexing that I'm showing the index finger there, or cervical rotation or elbow flexion, so that you can isolate those more. So what we're looking at doing is we're just really finding out if there's a preference for landing on the right side and this aversion to the left. Okay, what's going on with this left step piece? So then if we find out that it's like right hip abduction, and how I would find it is, again, I would take their leg, and if they're on their back, and I'd literally shove them out to the side, or if they're standing up, I'll say, okay, have you abduct your leg, and then immediately we go into a test, that neuro response test. And if it passes, we move on. So we load tolerance test joint by joint, and once we find it, then we literally are just having them actively attain the position. I think that what that's doing is by driving that motor output to those structures to create the position. It's like once there's probably a threshold, maybe a second half into it, where it kind of flips the switch. And then now it's like, oh, cool. It almost opens up that neural pathway. And then those structures can then send sensory input back to the brain, say, hey, actually, I'm safe here. This is not a problem. I don't need to avoid this position. And it kind of completes the loop. And then we check our work. And if it's good, then we shove them down the steps, or we don't actually do that. But then we challenge the nervous system. Hey, do a lunge, or if you're a fighter, maybe throw a certain punch or do a certain kick or whatever. It depends on who you're working on. You kind of tailor it to that person. We just try to, hey, let's do the stuff that you're doing every day. I'm going to find out what in your workout might be causing a little bit of where you're causing you to have to compensate. So we want to kind of find out where there's a disconnect, and we just kind of run through this process again. Okay, where did it break this time? And then looking at joint actions.
Gotcha. And then with vision, what would be some examples of resetting the vision? Is eye saccades or saccades part of that? Or obviously there's more to it, but
I would say that all, saccades and a lot of the things we see when people are talking neuro, we're very open to all of it. To me, I don't think of those things so much as the resets. I see those as the challenge. So we can do stuff like you do convergence, divergence. So most people see this, I would just do this 100,000 times. And I'm like, no, we're going to do it once. And when it triggers you, we're going to get your nervous system okay with it. And then the second time or the 10th time, all of a sudden it's good. And it's good next week and the week after. So we don't do a lot of this as training. We do a lot of this as the challenge or the saccades. So it's really cool. It's cool because it fits lock and step. So we are making I always say, like, if we do we elicit the saccade, we do real quick from one position to another. So an eye saccade is like the quickest muscular contraction in the human body. When we do that, I'm not assuming because they didn't get dizzy or vomit that their nervous system actually liked that. So people are like, hey, let's just do it. We'll do it a bunch of times and we'll get training. And that's fine. That's called a replacement strategy, where you're kind of like work hardening. You're doing it over and over and trying to get more skilled at it. We're saying is like, hey, why don't we check it one time? And if it breaks the system, quote unquote, breaks the system, then we'll just reset through the vision or proprioception or do the tragus. There's many options you have. And then now they're good temporarily. Then let's go right back to that drill. And if it breaks them, we reset it. And the third, the fifth, at some point, probably within 3 minutes, 5 minutes, it's going to be reset. And that's not a problem. So then we move on to bigger and higher challenges.
Okay, so by breaking them, that split squat would be the example that we used in the beginning, where if they maybe fell, then you would
Sure.
choose
or
a different
baseball
eye
pitcher.
Yeah.
It could be an eye movement. It could be a pitcher throwing a curveball or a fastball. It could be whatever you want to do. So I would say it's the stuff you're already doing are the inputs. So we look at those inputs and see if it challenges. And the ones that don't challenge individually, like, oh, cool. No, that's awesome. We don't need to worry about that. I'm looking for the most basic crap that you're doing every day that is subconsciously causing you to compensate and you didn't even know it. That's kind of what we're doing in this first session. Yeah.
Okay.
So then the saccade or these drills, I don't look at things as good or bad. What dictates good or bad, it's in that moment and it's in that person's nervous system. So instead, oh, this is bad, let's avoid it, we're saying, no, no, no. Or if we find it's bad, we got to train it, we're saying, no, no, no. We find if it causes that neurological chaos or that disorder to come along, disorganization, whatever term you want to use, then we do a reset, get them better, and then we go right back to that challenge, and we're looking to get where they can tolerate that challenge so that we can move on to more higher order, higher challenges.
Gotcha. And then I guess a lot of this, or some of this, can be used to, I guess, reduce pain as well, or even, I guess, improve mobility. Well, when we talk about flexibility and mobility, a lot of it is neurological, right? Because
yes,
it's
usually
not so much. Yeah, it's kind of your brain stopping you getting into those positions. So
yeah,
let's start there. Let's start there. Let's start with flexibility and mobility. How can you use something like this to unlock essentially your hips, shoulders, whatever?
Sure. Like a lot of times if you're like on social media, you'll see people are talking about the brain. They'll talk about the brain grants you strength. The brain grants you mobility. 100%. I absolutely agree with that, because if like when I learned this other system called MAT years ago, the guy Greg Roscoff was the guy who's my mentor who got me into muscle testing and that system. And he would talk about like taking a person, and if there's like this disorganization or lack of activation they were talking about, it's almost like they're walking on ice even though there's no ice present. And if you get enough stuff activated, it's almost like melting the ice. And I think that's just a great analogy. And again, I always like to give credit to wherever I learn and pick up things. So I think if someone has lack of mobility, I don't say, oh, look, it's an ankle mobility, therefore we have to do X, Y, and Z. I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, here's a lack of mobility. And I'm like, I got my fingers crossed. I really hope that lack of mobility is coming from a compensatory source or a neurological disorganization source. So then I'm going to do is just systemically create, hey, let's do a lunge, create stress, organize it. Okay, we got things good, and then go back and check, oh, it got better or it didn't. And if it didn't, you keep going. And if it did get better, you might say, oh, now you have new flexibility in an ankle. Maybe we need to create triggers around that. Can you handle load in that new position? So I don't have like, here's the outcome, so therefore you do this protocol. It's more like, hey, let's find out how you're disorganized. So it's much more of a systemic approach as opposed to like a desired outcome approach. So I tell people all the time, it feels like I'm not someone who gambles like a handful of times in my life, but it's like you're buying all those tickets that you scratch off, and and with Square One, it's like every one of those are a winner. Sometimes it's just another free ticket. No big deal. It's a little bit better. But sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, it's a $10,000 winner. Like you just like this guy had like knee pain for 12 years and you clear out 4 or 5 things and her knee pain goes away. So it's like, it's more like, let's organize challenge. And when the dust clears, there's a pretty good likelihood you're gonna have more
Mm.
mobility, less pain. So I always say I'm rooting for it, but the more I care about that symptom, the crappier I am at my job, and the less I kind of like I just distance myself from that outcome, and I just check in periodically during the session. Like maybe if I'm working with them for an hour, like maybe 5 times during that hour, I'm like, hey, how's that mobility? Or how's your pain doing? So we periodically check in as a litmus test, but I'm really just trying to challenge, organize, challenge, organize, challenge, break, organize, challenge, break, organize is what I'm really trying to do.
So, for example, on the ankle mobility thing, you might do that, check your ankle mobility and be like, okay, then you might come and you might do that air one, that tragus one where you're pressing the air, and then you'll go back to do the ankle to
Yeah.
see if it changed kind of
Yeah.
thing. That would be, yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times on the whatever they're doing, because they're probably already coming in with all their correctives or they're doing tissue work. So I'm like, hey, let's start with what you're already doing. Let's make sure that your interventions are actually in agreement with the nervous system. Because maybe it's a great exercise, but your nervous system is like, that's a threat. So we just have to reduce that threat. So it's not, we're not anti, that's why I say we're not anti any other system. That's just so crazy because I'm always tell people like, I'm not trying to be politically correct because if you know me, I'm actually not politically correct. Like I just tell you that how I think the truth is. So when I'm saying all these other systems, I look like, no, it's good stuff, but can we get better outcomes with that? Because maybe it's under the category in your mind that's a therapeutic intervention. But if you don't interview the person's nervous system, they might be having like an adverse response to it. And it doesn't always look like their head falls off or you break out in hives. It could be just so a subdued response. And with Square One, we're picking that up. So we get it where they can organize it and then go back to your deal. So we're literally, if you brought up RPR at the beginning of the session, at the beginning of our conversation, and so many of our students are RPR people. So I'm like, God, it's awesome. Like you have this bag, you have a bag of goodies. I'm gonna enhance that. We're gonna raise your game on that whole thing. So don't stop doing what you're doing. You just bring Square One side by side with it, and you find out, oh, well, that neurolymphatic activation or drainage effort. Maybe if you're doing 12 of them, like what if like 4 of them, their nervous system isn't cool with it and the other 8 it is? Like, okay, so let's focus on those 4. And then it's a very cohesive fit. I see it as such.
Regarding the reducing pain thing, so for example, people like chronic knee pain and stuff like that, I guess the question is regarding structural damage, real structural damage versus maybe just something that is a pain signal from, I don't know, years of whatever. I guess
compensating, whatever,
delineating the difference there. Like, obviously, at some point, like you can only do so much, but if it's structural, then there's not much else you can really do, right?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So the first thing I'm thinking of when you say that is like, okay, what I say all the time to all my clients, I don't have MRI or X-ray eyeballs, so I have to assume the worst. So let's assume that it is structurally damaged in case it is, because I don't want to be the guy that's contributing further to your issues. Yeah. So I always want to be very conservative in that regard. But the thing too is you think about it, like I think this is mythology with pain that's still pervasive in the mainstream. And it's changed a little bit in the movement industry over the last 5-10 years. But just because there's structural damage doesn't mean there's pain. And just because there's pain, it doesn't mean there's structural damage. Like there's people that have MRIs and X-rays done, and they have like all this arthritic change all in their vertebra, and they have no pain. And there's other people, they do these images, and they can't find any structural damage, and they do have pain. So is it that they're crazy and a wimp? I don't think so. I think it's the nervous system control over the tissue. So I would say if you have structural damage, we know there's an accompanying functional neurological piece. And if there's not structural damage, you still have a functional issue. So to me, the brain should come first. The brain rules all, controls all. I think it's a logical place to start, unless it's like, the guy just wrecked his motorcycle, like right now, like, we got to make sure his heart's going, like, let's save his life. And then, he's alive. And then we can think about, now structure, function, and we can kind of figure out how do we negotiate those waters. But for me, fortunately, my reputation is I'm the guy that kind of works with like chronic pain. Like we got a lot of people with hip, knee, back, neck, shoulder pain. So they're like, when nothing else works. So I'm kind of getting people that have already been looked at by multiple structural people. So the likelihood that most of the people that I'm working with have structural damage, they would have already picked it up. They've already been to a couple PTs, maybe an orthopedic person. So I'm kind of fortunate in the setting that I'm in as private practice. And that might look different if you're, at a sporting event. You're like a strength coach,
Mm.
and you have the medical people. So just hopefully there's a good relationship, and hopefully the medical people have an appreciation on some level for the nervous system, because it should be really like hand meets, whatever, coming together. I can't think of a good analogy because I'm 3 hours of sleep again, but the hand fitting in the glove, like, should be pretty good. Like, should be good fit, structure, and the function people together. So just because there's pain, don't assume structural damage. And just because there's not pain, don't assume that there's not structural damage. So we always want to proceed cautiously, especially those of us who are not licensed to make diagnoses and, and to treat tissue and that sort of thing.
I guess maybe people can relate to this. You can tell me if this is actually, I guess, part of a neurological phenomenon or not. But for example, when you have, say, pain in your elbow for 6 months, and then you get an injury or pain in your
Mm,
knee 6 months later, but
yeah.
then the elbow pain's gone and it's only
Right.
the knee pain now. That
Right.
would be like that phenomenon, correct? Yes, no?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
clear. That seems to me to be a
Yeah.
neurological piece. Like, your brain can only focus on one things at a time. And again, and I always tell people too, it's like, you have to be careful with your words when we're talking to our athletes. Like, oh, it's in your head. Like, well, I'm not saying you're imagining it, but it's a brain piece. So it's not. So I'm on your team. So I'm not challenging that you're a sissy or whatever. But literally, your brain and it's all about perception, and that's the word I've been really hounded on
Mm.
the last couple 2-3 years. Because your perception, it's the collective input coming from your sensory input, from vision, vestibular, all that. That's what is the raw materials of your perception. So your subconscious perception is massive. So the example I use of that all the time, it's like a little bit of a beating of a dead horse if you're around me enough. It's like when you sprained your ankle, I always like to ask people, hey, where'd you go for your limping lessons? Like, who taught you that? So it's like, that's like kind of another example of, well, I didn't think about it, it just hurt. So I kind of alter how I'm limping. And then what happens is, after the tissue heals, okay, it's X number of weeks later, and that person, maybe you don't see them limping, but then you play sports and they're doing these big loopy circles. They're not cutting hard anymore because they still are
Mm.
acting as if the ankle is injured, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
robbing them of performance and setting them up for their next injury.
I remember when I had my meniscus done, I was like 16, and getting back to sport, and just
Yep.
that fear. It took. It
Yeah.
reminds me of a rehab process, obviously, where with people with ACLs, is they'll, at least in rugby, they'll include like a ball and they'll pass the ball back and forth, so they're not thinking about the knee and whatever
Hmm.
they're doing at the time. But
Yeah. I like it. I like it.
it took until tennis was my main sport growing up, so I was
Hmm.
playing tennis and I was a little timid on it, but it wasn't until you start running after a ball, you kind of completely forget about it, and then you do something and you go, oh, it's actually fine, and then that kind of
Right.
just unlocks it straight away. I guess
And
that
that's
would be
what
a
I think.
similar
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah, it's a thing. A lot of times people talk about pain being like psycho-emotional. That's definitely part of it, right? So
Mm.
that's what I talk an analogy all the time with people, because again, I didn't come in the neurology door, so I'm trying to tell a story that I would kind of conceptually see in my mind. So I look at it that what I'm doing with my clients and my customers is I'm giving their brain access to certain positions and shapes and patterns, and once we give them that access, then we use it. So like, I had a guy in a workshop. It was kind of our test dummy, or one of our test dummies, and he had I think it was a car accident, and there's certain moves he was afraid to do, and one of them was like a hip hinge. So after we cleared out some basic patterns, I started going after hip hinge. I said, dude, I'm not trying to challenge you, I'm not trying to goad you too hard, but let's just go halfway into a pain producing position. So if 20 degrees you have pain, just go 10 degrees. So we would just kind of go into it, and the nervous system would trigger. And as we were clearing these layers, he's going further, further, further. And by the time we got
Mm.
down pretty far, he's like, dude, he's like looking scared. I'm like, but do you feel it? He's like, no, I don't feel any pain. Like, yeah, at the beginning, you were feeling pain here. Now you're here. So we're kind of giving his brain access to it. And then we want him to go and use it, and kind of, as best he can, forget about it. And as we set them up for success and you have more of those successful events, the fear can go away. But it's funny, you said about getting hurt when you're younger. I hurt my back right around the same age you would have been. Like, I was probably 15, 16,
Mm.
playing basketball. And now I would say, for the most part, if 340 to 360 days a year, I don't really have back pain, but I have an episode here and there every, maybe it's twice a year, once every 2 or 3 years. But it's crazy. Like, sometimes if something falls on the ground, I'll find myself put my hands on my knees, like, oh my, I'm acting like it's 15 years ago. I don't even have pain, but I catch myself falling back into those old habits. So I don't know that we probably can wipe it totally out. There's things that maybe I'm just a sissy too, but I think it's that old memories, that's still in there, deep in there, that maybe it's not totally gone. So it's a lot better But if you were to say, "Hey, jump on that box," like, can you give me 5 minutes to warm up? Because that would be a little scary for
Mm.
me, like versus 20 years ago, maybe even with the pain. But it's like I've been hurt enough times over the last 20 years here and there. Like, I just don't really want to have a big injury again. So yeah, it
Yeah.
fears a son of a gun, man.
Yeah, I know not a lot of martial artists or combat athletes. They do suffer from knee pain. I mean, you hear it all the time on the mats, especially
Mm,
jiu-jitsu guys too. But
mm.
when you mentioned about having your hands on your knees to bend over, sometimes like I spend a lot of my time competing in weightlifting as well. So sometimes my
Okay.
knees can feel a little funny, and I'll
Hmm.
sometimes do that and bend down gingerly, and there'll be some pain every now and then. But it's almost like I've ingrained that pattern. Like there is going to be
Yes.
pain. So the
Yeah.
more
So you
pain.
set yourself
So
up,
what do you do?
possibly.
What do you do in that situation to start clearing that
Literally,
out?
if I'm running square one on you, we will literally go after those. Like, one of the questions I ask people when they come in is like, okay, what are you doing that's weird in the gym? What are the exercises you're avoiding because it just scares you? So let's start with the stuff that, because we all have these. If you're a movement person, you have certain things that you're good at, certain things you suck at. So I'm always looking at, what do you suck at and what are you afraid of? Maybe I phrase it differently, but literally, like how you just described it, like, let's use that as let's test that scenario. Have you do it? Check the arm, and probably even the novelty the first time is probably going to trigger, but then it keeps triggering. Like, okay, get yourself in that position where it's scary, and then all of a sudden it doesn't trigger you, but it's still scary. Like, okay, now get in that position. Let's add head movements. Let's add convergence. Let's stack in different challenges and make it such a robust piece. Like, dude, you own this position. So I'll put you a lopsided, like
Mm,
I'll have you one foot on an RX pad and the other side on solid ground. They'll switch them. I do all the time with like deadlifts. So I'll like solid ground, just get into a setup in the position. Don't pick it up. Okay, now stand up. Let's check it. Let's clear it. Okay, now pick up a lightweight. We'll do that. Then we do offset, like either lopsided load, put more weight on one side. We can do convergence, divergence. We just stack things. We create these crazy,
gotcha.
challenging environments and get it where your brain doesn't flinch. Like, I got this. So instead of practicing it, I'm more like, I'd rather have 1,000 versions of that deadlift that your brain knows how to handle, instead of like, it's not the practice. It's almost like wiping a slate clean for that hyper
Mm,
specific environment. And the brain is so, what I've been learning, and I still feel like I'm learning, is how finicky. That's not the right word. That's negative. How sensitive the nervous system is, and how,
mm.
if I clear you sitting on the ground and you hold like arms overhead and it triggers you with whatever 20-pound dumbbells, whatever, and we do it 3 times, 5 times, and then it clears through square one, and then I have you stand up and do the same thing. It's a whole new environment. And then once we clear that, then we do a split stance, do an overhead press, new environment. Close one eye,
Mm.
new environment. So I'm always kind of different iterations of the same thing.
So in those examples, would you do some of those things like the eye stuff and whatever else in the position that you're maybe fearful
Yeah.
of or in pain? Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then I'll monitor if it triggers them. If it doesn't trigger, like, cool, don't worry about it. Let's find. I'm always trying to break them. Like, break softly, break,
Mm. And by tricky, you
break
mean
the
pain, right?
software. No,
Or
more of a neuro
it could be.
response. It could be
Okay,
pain, maybe
yeah,
with or without pain. If it's painful, I'm paying extra attention to it because I know that matters to them, and that'll curb your behavior. That'll change your behavior. So if there are pain producing positions that sometimes they don't trigger, I'll say, like, maybe it's like, I don't know, like doing a bench press at a certain angle, like, a third of the way. I'm like,
yeah,
oh yeah, a weird shoulder thing. Like, okay, we'll just do it with the bar, something that's very light for them, so that we can do it without totally freaking them out, and we
yeah.
clear it. And then we start off with just, okay, let's get up to a reasonable load. Let's get up to, maybe 60% of what they might do in a workout. Then I'll say, okay, let's go a little lighter. Let's go to the bar only, and have your head to the left, and then we'll check it. Have your head to the right. So trying to find out what are the provoking to the nervous system, not necessarily pain, but
Mm,
what can their system handle. So if we have where I can do, whatever, I say 1,000, whatever. If we can do, 30 different versions of that bench press, I probably
okay.
prepared them for just a regular old boring neutral neck position, right? So I'm
Yeah.
just trying to stack things in that look like what they might do. Then we say, hey, drive through your heels. Okay, drive through one heel as you're doing, drive through the other heel. I mean, literally, it's just stuff that might happen, like if the one side's stronger than the other, and
Mm,
they have to push into one heel. So we're literally making it very real world and just really exaggerating or hyper embellishing aspects of what they're already doing, and just
right.
say, hey, yeah, not injuring and we're not producing pain doesn't mean that the nervous system gives you the all clear. So we're
Mm.
just we're like anal retentive little detectives that are just taking nothing for granted and just creating these environments and find out what breaks the system.
So then, what are you looking for example, in that if you're bench pressing, say, with your head to the right, what are you
Yeah.
looking for? What are you looking for to fail? Is it more technical
Mhm.
of the bench press or?
Nope. So not even I'm only watching enough that I don't drop the bar in their face. I don't want to kill them.
Yeah.
But I honestly I try to close my eyes. I try not to use my coach's eyes too much because then I can start making up these logical stories that are just not accurate. And I would say logical. I would say accurate. Yeah, logical is a poor substitute for accurate. We care about accurate. So what I'm looking for isn't so much with my coach's eyes. It's more like the do it, okay, rack the bar, and then I do that neuro response test. And that neuro
Okay.
response test lets us know whether they were like hunky dory, like yeah, thumbs up, or nah, that fail type deal. So it's really the nervous system response to the activity is what I'm looking for.
Okay. And that split squat was an example of a neuro response test, the one where you split squatting, holding the split squat and turning your head.
That would be the
Or
challenge.
no,
So
that'd be
so
challenge.
say we
Sorry.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, no worries. So say they do like a split stance and they're not, piece of cake. There's no moral reflex. There's no writing mechanism. So maybe it's like, okay, close your eyes and make your head go down, slow up and down dynamic. Oh, they had that moral reflex. I'll check the arm. Okay, it fails. And then I can either do the tragus, we can do a visual reset, we can do a vestibular reset, we can do a proprioception. So then I go into square one and it's your right shoulder. We do this. There's a lot of details into it.
Mhm.
But we find out that, it's shrugging your shoulder as an example. Okay,
Yeah.
so they'll do the whole shrug. All right, they're like, oh, I check their patterns, right versus left, balance, up versus down, balance. Okay, go back to the challenge, split stance, eyes closed, head up and down. Oh, no moral reflex. I'll check their arm. Oh, it's solid. Let's add another piece. Okay, more split stance, eyes closed, transverse plane. Let's go ahead right to left with your eyes closed. Oh, that looks good. Oh, let's go right to left in the frontal plane. Triggered, let's have that moral reflex, check the arm, check the leg, whatever the brain response, the nervous system response to the activity. If it breaks them, then we reset them.
And when you're saying you're checking the arm, you're pushing down on the arm to see how quickly it can resist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so like if you were to buy like a neuro response muscle testing manual, it would be called like an upper trap test. I don't like calling that because like there's like a billion muscles involved. Like that's a position of
Yeah.
emphasis, but it's also your delt, it's also your obliques. There's the scapular retractors. There's a lot, there's lots of things going on. Your bicep, a lot of muscles, but that would be named the upper trap test is a common one I
Gotcha.
use. Yeah, so but I don't care what the name of it is. I almost want to call that test one and call it test two because I'm trying to break people's brain from thinking in terms of muscles if they're not orthopedic
Yeah.
surgeons. It's like we got to think about terms of joint actions and patterns and movements and shapes more so than specific muscles.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I've got one more question for you to
Yeah,
finish this
yeah,
podcast, and it
I love it.
revolves around PNF stretching. PNF stretching would
Okay.
then be a version of, I guess, integrated nervous system with it, because I mean you're literally
Could be.
flexing the muscle at the end range.
I think anything could represent a way to integrate things. It's a matter of having a systematic way to assess if it integrated or didn't. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about PNF, like so, let's use a hamstring as an example.
Yeah.
So you'd have them go actively into hip flexion and then give them resistance on the short side to engage those hip flexors
Yeah.
more and let go further. Because I know PNF is like kind of loaded. There's more, or is
Yeah,
there a
or
different
even just
version?
like pushing against you with the hamstring and then
Oh,
releasing
yeah.
and then getting more range.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's one. Yep. So possibly. So what I would do if you like doing that, I would do one of them. Then I would check the neuro response test. Like I didn't like it, so I'd reset them and I go right back to that PNF thing.
Okay.
So you
That
can
makes sense.
partner them together. So again, I look at square one as a way to. It's a way to interview the nervous system throughout whatever session you want to do in a one-on-one setting. It's real. I mean, you can do 2-on-1, 3-on-1, but one-on-one, it's brilliant at the one-on-one level. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now,
Cool.
this has been super insightful, Shawn, and a great
Yeah.
dive into square one. But do you want to maybe let everyone know where they can find you and follow you and check everything out?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It was great. I loved your line of questioning. Very inquisitive. Some slightly different questions I got in the past. So very.
Oh, perfect.
You're thinking person. You're asking very, very good questions. Honestly. Yeah, but to find me, I rarely point people to our website. I usually send people to Instagram. That's where we're most active, and that's just at Square One System, and it's singular, and it's a numerical one. So it's not ONE. It's just Square. The number one system is our handle there.
Perfect. I'll
That's
link
the
that
best
up
place to.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll put that in the description for everyone to see as well and go to when they watch this. So if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or whatever it is later on, check that out. But thanks for coming on, Shawn. I appreciate it.
Oh man, thank you for giving me your platform with your audience, man. I really appreciate you. Thank you.